Have you liked the music this evening? I thought that's why you came. Glad you did. I enjoyed it too. I think it's very, very nice to have this music. We wish we had a lot more of it, don't you? That's a reminder to those planning our programs. For God so loved the world, He gave us His only Son. As many as received Him, to them He gave the right to be the sons of God, right? And if sons, then what? Heirs. Heirs of God and of Christ, of His kingdom, everlasting life, and all the good things. We've learned that the covenant is a marriage contract and also the promise of all these good things He's promised to the heirs. And the law, as we learned last night, was the heart of that contract, was it not? The heart of the covenant. Some asked a question about Galatians chapter 3, about the schoolmaster, and I should clarify it. I understand several have the question. Would you read with me Galatians 3, verse 19, and then 23 to 25? Just a little clarification of last night's message. Wherefore then serveth the law? He was added because of transgressions till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. Then verses 23 to 25. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up under the faith which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we're no longer under a schoolmaster. We said the schoolmaster was the Ten Commandment law, quoting there from page 233 and 234 of First Selected Messages. I do not believe this is so much a historical date when the seed comes or when faith comes, as it is an experience. The law on stone leads me or brings me to Christ, verse 24. To bring us unto Christ. The law was our schoolmaster. So the Ten Commandment law brings me to Jesus. And after I've come to Jesus, after faith has come, then I'm no longer under the schoolmaster. In other words, the Ten Commandment law and stone leads me to Christ. The law on the Ten Commandment law on flesh and the ceremonial law. And after I've come to Him, after faith has come, after the seed has come into my life, then I don't have to be led to Christ. But the condemnation, the guilt that comes from the law and stone, leads me to Christ, as does the Spirit of Christ. When I've come to Him, then I'm no longer under it. So it's an experience when the time comes, I think, rather than a historical date. So once the Ten Commandment law and stone has led me to Jesus and to faith in Christ, then I look to Him rather than to law and stone. Hope this is helpful in clarifying some of it to you. We want to talk about the Sabbath tonight. And I've entitled it, The Sabbath, the Golden Clasp. And the reason for that title is found in Volume 6 of the Testimonies, page 351. The Sabbath is a golden clasp that unites God and His people. The Sabbath is a golden clasp. I like to call it spiritual jewelry. Spiritual jewelry is okay. Spiritual jewelry. Don't misunderstand me. The Sabbath is a golden clasp that unites God and His people. Gold in the Bible symbolizes faith and love, so it's something that ties us to God, and He's tied to His people. Page 650 of Volume 6 of Testimonies, and read that whole chapter. It's quite brief. The Sabbath is a sign of the relationship existing between God and His people. As I've been trying to tell you, the Ten Commandment law is part of the covenant, and it's a marriage contract. God has come down loving us, making many promises. Remember, you're married by a promise, as you vow to each other. And so commandment keeping is the keeping of marriage vows. If you thought of it that way, you would never believe the law was the yoke of bondage, unless you have a bad marriage. You'd never believe that. Marriage vows are vastly different than many do's and don'ts, aren't they? Just vastly different. God is not some dictator telling us you better do this and you better not do that or you'll burn. He isn't like that. If you love me, keep my commandments. Isn't that the way it is? And if you don't love me, you can't. So He leads us to a marvelous love relationship with Him. And the Sabbath is a golden clasp in the middle of that wedding contract that binds us to Him in a very special relationship. Do you remember our first study last Saturday evening? What book did we study? Last Saturday, what did we study? Thank you, I knew you all knew it. The book of Ruth. And there we found out in chapter 3 of that book in verse 1, something very special. Do you remember what it said in chapter 3, verse 1? Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? The English Bible says for the word rest, that you might be happily settled. Marriage to a fine, stable, good providing husband is rest to a lady. Right, ladies? Do more than this. Unless you're empty-headed. Make those fellows hear you, you know. Isn't that right, ladies? Good providers are worth $1 million. They really are. The kind you can always depend on. Kind that always come home on time or let you know they're not coming and why they're not coming. The kind that always provide. The kind that are always there to take care of you. Provide rest. And that's the Bible term for married. May I not seek rest for thee? Happily settled, the English Bible says. When you come down to Hebrews chapter 4, you'll find an unusual thing about this term, and many of you know it already. Verses 4, 10, and 11 in Hebrews chapter 4. And it talks about this rest. For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all his works. And it goes on to describe a peculiar kind of rest, verses 10 and 11. For he that has entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works as God did from his. Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest. Labor to enter that rest. There is a restfulness that God provides. Peace like a river from the Prince of Peace. The Sabbath is a symbol of that rest. As we cease from our physical works of making a livelihood, we testify that in Christ we have found a marvelous spiritual rest. The ceasing from our physical work is only a symbol. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things, what things? Your food, place to live, your clothing, all these things will be added unto you. And you'll be clothed like the lilies of the valley. Solomon couldn't afford all of that. Beautiful robes of white I'll provide for you. Even righteousness will be yours. The Lord will provide. All good things He provides. He's a marvelous husband to the church. And so in Exodus chapter 20, verse 10, where He talks about the seventh commandment, He said, stop working on the Sabbath. You don't have to work. I'll take care of you. How many believe God takes care of us? Sure you do. He takes care of us. Now, the real meaning of this is all anxiety is gone. Forget about life insurance. He's going to take care of us. God is not dead. Forget about trying to make a living and all these things. Trust me. That doesn't mean loaf, does it? Does it? Doesn't mean to be lazy at all. The Bible condemns laziness. But you don't have to be anxious about tomorrow. You don't have to be worried and concerned and fretting and getting ulcers and taking tranquilizers. You don't have to. I will give you rest. Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden. I will give you rest. You know, our lives as Sabbath keepers need to be a testimony to the world what the Sabbath means. It's not just the keeping of that day that testifies. It's the peace in our souls. You know that? The rest is there. Like a lady with a very fine husband. Nothing to worry about. He'll take care of everything, right? Isn't that right? He'll take care of everything. I'm not worried. I got too good a husband to worry. So the Bible says in Isaiah chapter 54:5. Did you memorize it yet? Isaiah 54:5 is a good memory text. We read it the other night. Let us read it again. For thy Maker is thine husband. The Lord of hosts is his name. And thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. The God of the whole earth shall he be called. Thy Maker is thy husband. He'll take care of you. He was the Creator in the beginning, who planned us, who invented us. He's your Redeemer who buys you back. Nothing to worry about. Why fret and stew about all these things? Why don't we have peace in our souls? Why don't we just go to bed at night and sleep? Why worry? The problem is, you know, that we haven't really linked up with Jesus. And that very, very close fellowship. So we can say, the Lord's for me, the Lord takes care of me. Why do I get excited about everything? Why get worried? Have you learned that the Lord does take care of everything? Have you learned that? I'm still learning. I hate to tell you that. But for those of you still learning, maybe you'll feel a little more comfortable to find I'm still learning. You know, after you have a lot of experience in the ministry, you think you know how to do it. But we never know how to do it. Right? We just think we do. When I try to do it myself and think I know how, I accomplish nothing for God. When I know I can't do it, and I meet problems I know I can't handle, and I really pray and consciously seek the Lord to go with me, then unusual things happen. Why? Because He goes there. I was speaking to young people this morning about hospital calls. I noticed years ago that unique things used to happen at certain hospital calls. Other times nothing would happen. And I couldn't figure out why. People would be so grateful for my visit, and I just couldn't understand why they were so thankful. They'd take my hand in both of theirs and just thank me profusely. And I thought, well, at first, they just kind of make a young guy feel good. But it was so sincere. Then the Lord began to teach me something after a while, that when I went to a very difficult case where someone was dying with cancer or had a very severe heart condition or something like that, then I said, Lord, I can't do anything for those people. And I really prayed, Lord, if you don't go, nothing will happen. It doesn't do any good for a minister to come, just another visit and kind of tell a joke once in a while, make them feel good and go home. Is that the Lord's visit? No. It's good to make people feel good, isn't it? Nothing wrong with that. But that's not the Lord's visit. And I said, Lord, do something for them. You go there. I can't help them. And then in my great unbelief, the Lord would go with me, and I didn't know it. And I was amazed that they would thank me so much, but God had manifested Himself in that hospital room, and they knew it. They could tell the difference. It was a different visit. When I did not consciously take the Lord with me, He didn't go. And it was just a man walking in there like anybody else. I can recall how I visited a wealthy lady in the hospital one time, quite a few years ago. She had tried and tried to get her mother-in-law and her husband interested, but would never work. This is a Jewish family. And so I walked in on a very casual visit one afternoon. The lady had minor surgery, and we visited for a while, and the grandmother was there. And as I closed the visit, I asked, may I pray for you? And she said, by all means, and I prayed for her and for her husband and her family and for the grandmother. A prayer very much like you would pray. And I turned to leave. And I noticed someone following me, and I walked out the door, and the grandmother was right behind me, and she closed the door behind us. And she took my hand in both her hands, and she said, no one ever prayed for my family like that. No one. She walked back in the room, and the next day I learned she was weeping as she expressed to her daughter-in-law her gratitude that someone would pray for her family like that. From that time on, she was my friend. The next time I saw her, I backed out of the driveway, this daughter-in-law, to make room for the grandmother to park her big Cadillac. And our cars met out there side by side in the middle of the street, and she turned off the ignition and rolled down the window, and she talked and talked and talked and talked and didn't care who came by. She owned half the town anyhow. And one hospital call broke all the barriers. Just like that. I can't, He can. The Lord will provide, will He not? My God shall provide all your needs according to His riches and glory, the Apostle Paul said. All your needs. The Maker, your Maker, my Maker, is our husband. Is He a good husband? Does He care for every need we have? Does He give us security and peace and all the necessities of life? Yes, He does. When you learn to depend upon Him for everything and not upon your experience, you'll be amazed at all the good things that will happen to you when you trust Him like that. Desire of Ages, page 289, has a beautiful little quotation about finding rest in Him. It's a little complicated, but read it when you have time. The Sabbath points to the works of creation as an evidence of His mighty power in redemption. He made us by the word of His mouth in the beginning and formed with His hand. It points to His mighty power in redemption. You don't have to worry about being redeemed. The mighty one's on the job, you see. While it calls to mind the lost peace of Eden, it tells of peace restored through the Savior. The Creator is the Recreator, the Redeemer. Tells of the lost peace of Eden. It also tells of peace restored through the Savior. And every object of nature repeats His invitation, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. So the Sabbath is a marvelous memorial of rest. It points to the mighty husband of the church, who's always on the job, who never forsakes us, He never forgets us, who always provides for man's necessity and treats us so much better than we deserve. Can't you trust Him? Why worry? Rest in His arms like a wife and the muscular arms of a big husband who always does a marvelous job of caring for his lady love. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 3, is a text I think is in the heart of all this about the Sabbath and the Lord being the husband of the church. Isaiah 1, verse 3. The ox knoweth his owner, the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. It's a terrible rebuke. I'm not trying to scold you for the Lord. He said the dumb animals, they know their owners. But he said, my people don't. How do dumb animals know their owners? When the farmer comes in to milk the cow in the morning in the old-fashioned days with a milking machine, the cows go, why? The right fellow's coming in the barn door, right? They can tell every time. Last February I was visiting at a dairy, the one of you operate here tonight, over in Alberta. And they have the milking machines there, and they have the door open, the automatic on the left. The other side, the door would open for another cow to come in, and she wouldn't come in. And he said to me, step over where she can't see and she'll come in. She doesn't recognize you. Get out of the way. I stepped off the side and she came walking in looking around to see where I was, hiding behind the door there someplace. Didn't trust me. She didn't know who I was. He was going back and forth there all the time, with everything. No trouble at all. He's the right fellow. How did she know? For one who always takes care of the cattle, who always feeds them, who always milks them, who takes care of them when they're sick, takes them out to pasture, brings them in. Dumb animals know who's on the job, don't they? They know. Who feeds you? Oh, you say, I work hard. Nonsense. Who gives you the health to work hard? Who gives you favor with your boss so you don't get fired tomorrow? Who does that? Who gives you the mental ability so you keep on your job? Where did you get all that? We had a fellow down in Loma Linda going to work one morning on his motorcycle, and a van coming at him from the opposite direction. Couldn't see him in the sun coming up in the morning, and turned a left turn right in front of the motorcyclist. And the fellow hit his head on the mirror, the rear vision mirror of the van. He had a helmet on, but it hit right below his helmet. It made him incapable of ever serving again in work. That fast. All his judgment was ruined just so quickly. I don't think he was ever deserving of a thing like that. But he can no longer provide for his family because he doesn't have good judgment. One little accident. Why haven't you had an accident like that? Why haven't I? What's so good about you? You've been preserved all these years. Not one thing. The Lord takes care of us, or we would never be able to work and make a living. And you better believe with all your heart. We don't make a living because we're so wise and so strong, but because He's so good and constantly provides for us. Our God is a marvelous provider. Suppose you had a puppy dog. From the time it was born, and you're the one that fed that little puppy, gave it water, place to stay, perhaps in your bed even with you for some boys and girls. You took care of it day by day and hour by hour for months and months and months. Finally, it's 2 years old. You're in a room with about 12 people. Somebody puts the dog down in the middle of the room, and everybody calls the dog at one time. Where does the dog go? The master. Has no problem at all, right over to you. Why? The dog, like all dumb animals, know their owner, the one who provides for them. And God, in a terrible lament, says, but my people Israel don't know. Friends, we have to pray for an enlightenment these days that'll open our eyes and our dull minds and help us to realize that every day of this life is a marvelous provision of a mighty God of grace. Every day. And the Sabbath is one way of saying, I know that He keeps me. I know that He protects me. I know the Creator who made all things very good in the beginning is still on the job. And therefore we live. If you don't believe it, wait until we have a drought that lasts 4 or 5 years, and you'll find out how necessary it is for God to be on the job every moment or we wouldn't live. If you go back to creation in the beginning, it says there in Genesis, in the 2nd chapter, that everything He made, it was very good. Everything. Very good. You begin to look at all the things that God made. Genesis 1:31, and you'll be amazed. He said, let them have dominion, rulership. over all these things I have made. He made Adam and Eve a king and a queen. Man must have the ability to direct, to rule. Man has the capability over all the rest of nature that God has given him. And he said, employ your wisdom. And so he brought the animals by Adam to name them all. Wouldn't that be fun? Some of us have trouble naming one or two children, you know. How'd you like to name all the animals that we have, that they must have had in those days? Adam had a tremendous job. What did God provide for man there in the garden? Just read Genesis 2 at your leisure. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. What were the peaches like in the Garden of Eden? We get beautiful peaches from the Okanagan, but what were they like in the Garden of Eden? How big do you think they were? What were the grapes like? I'm sorry you're going to eat before you go to bed tonight, but I want to tell you something. What were the avocados like? In Africa, we lived near the equator, and we had one tree at one of our mission stations, used to call it Ngoma Mission. And there they had a tree where we'd always get tree-ripened avocados, big as my 2 fists together at least, great big things. They were not shipped green like the avocados you get in the market. They were picked dead ripe. You've never eaten an avocado like that in your life. They're just fantastic avocados. We had vine-ripened pineapple from the Congo, now Zaire. We used to always think somebody had added sugar to them. They were so sweet you could hardly believe it. Just pure sugar, it seemed like. Beautiful pineapple. Hardly believe what that's like. Most of the stuff we get nowadays, you know, is shipped green so it won't get bruised in transportation. But tree-ripened fruit in the garden. Can you imagine? Years ago when I was in the military, we were swimming in Arizona at a pool of a very wealthy family provided for the GIs. And as we left there, they had tree-ripened grapefruit still hanging on the trees. Great big things, you know, pink grapefruit from Arizona. Beautiful things, you know. I picked 3 of them, put on my big Turkish towel, and dunked it in the pool on a day when it was about 115 in the shade, and hung it outside of the truck as we journeyed about 20 miles back to Tucson, Arizona, at our base. By the time I got to evaporation, it chilled them down a little bit, and I peeled them off, you know, and began to eat that pink grapefruit. You can't hardly understand what it's like. You never eat grapefruit like it in your whole life. It just makes me water. I can hardly talk. Beautiful grapefruit. What was it like in the garden? It's unbelievable. Every tree you may freely eat, the whole thing. What was the garden home like? And the useful employment of dressing the garden and keeping it where the vines would never die. Everything was perennial. For 1,000,000 years. Everything. You could dress a rose bush for 100, 200, 300 years. Same rose bush. And the blossoms will always be there. The same was there 15 years ago, still there today. And you say, hi, Susie, how are you today? I think they talk to the plants like they tell you to do nowadays. Right? What are you doing over there, Jim? And you point to another one. What were yellow roses like in the garden? What were gladiolas like? Hibiscus. Violets. They must have had violets as big as my hand, don't you think? At least. And great big pansies, big as my head. Something like that. They must have had beautiful, beautiful plants and flowers there, you know. To dress the garden and keep it there where nothing would ever die, every flower that has ever blossomed would keep on blossoming and blossoming and blossoming and never, never fade. What was it like? What was it like to take one little inhalation of the perfumes of the garden? You know, when they have the orange blossoms down there in Southern California, it's just so pungent and so thick and so rich, it almost stops you up. And the evenings when the dew comes down and the wind isn't blowing, the whole community is just filled with orange blossom fragrance. Isn't that right? Sometimes in apple orchards like that, or a peach orchard, or around lilacs. In the garden where everything was blooming at the same time and just filled with perfume. What was it like? As one fragrance come from this direction, another one from that, another one from that, almost every time you turn your head you get a different odor. What must that have been like? What were the sights like in the garden to dazzle the eye? What was it like to see one sunset in the Garden of Eden, where there was no smog, and no smoke, and no dust, and no contamination to mar God's glory? But there he could paint in all his creative power a beautiful sunset. And then to be out of bed every morning and watch the sun come up. Because sometimes sunrise is more beautiful than sunset, right? What was it like to see the dawn as it just turned gray, you know? The sun came up from the east. What was it like to live in the garden where God made everything that was pleasant to the sight, Genesis 2, verse 9, every tree? There they had beautiful rivers, we're told. They had gold, they had silver and precious stones. They had rippling streams, all kinds of things. What was it like? What was it like to go up and stick your finger in the nostril of a camel? I'm kind of a screwball, you know, but what was it like to go up there and take one of the hairs on an elephant's trunk and kind of pull it off? Don't pull it out, you know, just kind of play with it a little bit. What was it like to touch a marten? I was up north in Shetland last spring and went out to visit a trapper, John Terry, way out there 60 miles from no place. And there are the beautiful marten skins, you know, that he had in the fishers. Such delicate fur. You run your fingers over there and you can't believe how fine and how smooth it is. What was it like to have a live one come wiggling up next to you, and you say, "How you doing today, George?" And you give him a little pet. Wouldn't that be fun? Marvelous. What's it like to get a look at a hummingbird this far away? In Southern California, there's a place up there in the mountains where they have hummingbird feeders all around your head like this. And the hummingbirds come in there 20 or 30 at one time. You stick your head right in the middle of them and watch all those hummingbirds. But they're all buzzing like everything, you know, around you like a bunch of bees. I'd like to say, "Hey, stop, I want to get a look at you." I'd like to have them land on my finger, wouldn't you? And come up and see about 6 different hummingbirds all on my fingers at one time so I see all the difference in them. This is beautiful birds. What's it like? Rather than have to have a telescope to see them at a great distance. What would it be like to have a flamingo come up, you know, and just stop right in front of you and strut around like this a little bit so you can get every view of him? God had marvelous things in the garden. The most beautiful thing he had in the garden was that glorious person called Eve. The Bible simply calls her a helpmeet. Spiritual guests said that they were of harmonious proportions. No one had too long a neck and too big a head, or too long legs and short trunk, or long trunk and short legs. Everybody was beautifully proportioned. You know, most of us are all out of order. Don't get mad at each other about that. That's what sin has done to us. But what was Eve like of harmonious proportions? Ruddy complexion, we're told. Came up to Adam's shoulder. What was it like when that perfect man looked upon that perfect woman and God said, "She's for you, Adam." Said, "Eve, he's for you, that big bruiser." What was it like? And man was the crowning climax of God's creation. God's master invention. Do you know that? You still are God's master invention. And He's going to keep on working on us until we give glory to His holy name by the restoration of the moral image of God in man. Right? The Recreator is on the job. He hasn't stopped. He's still working. As you think about all the good things in the garden, try to think about one thing that God left out that could have been for man's needs and man's blessings. I've been thinking about it for years. I can't think of one thing. He would come in the cool of the evening for our intellectual needs, right? Our mental needs. And spiritual. And the Creator Himself would sit down and begin to teach us about the science of nature. For everything in science is nature, isn't it? Biology and botany and zoology and physics are all about the laws of nature, and chemistry. And there He sat with all the visual aids of the garden and began to tell them how He invented this and what He had in mind and how they're structured and their anatomy and all the rest of things. Wouldn't that be fun? Wouldn't it? Heaven's going to be a school, right? And the great Creator's going to teach us on and on and on and on and on, and we'll never grow weary with those fantastic minds we'll have, and the greatest teacher in all the universe. What a wonderful thing. And the Lord would do that in the garden. And so the God of that marvelous creation who provided so much for man said, "Remember the Sabbath day. Set it apart from all the rest. Don't forget me. And all that I have provided for you. Am I not a good husband? Do I not do the best for you that any being could ever do? Am I not? Don't you love me? Don't you trust me? Don't you think you ought to give your heart to me? Warm up a little bit, you know. God is not far away, or we'd all be dead, right? Could not possibly exist if He were far away. We have to have Him. The ox knows his owner. The ass his master's crib. Do not my people know who provides for them? The marvelous God of all creation provides everything very good today. When He brought His people out of Egypt, He was choosing them for Himself. You go back there to the commandments again where we were the other night, Exodus chapter 20, verses 2 and 3 and on to 5. You'll find out he says that I brought you out of Egypt. I was your Redeemer in a very special way. I'm the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondmen. Thou shalt have no other gods. Don't make any graven image. Don't bow down and worship them. In other words, set your affections upon me. Remember me. Forget the other gods. Don't give your devotions to them. Have all your heart for me, all your affections for me. I brought you out of there because I loved you. I wrought all those miracles and all that marvelous deliverance because I wanted you. And as we read the other night, I set my affections upon you. I want you. He said in Exodus 31, verse 13, the Sabbath is a sign that I have sanctified you. That word sanctified doesn't mean sanctification. It means I've set you apart. I brought you out of Egypt and made you a distinctive, unique people. You're mine. Won't you be mine? I have chosen you. I have delivered you. I want you. Will you be mine? And the Sabbath was that unique sign between him and his people that they belonged to him and worshipped him. The Sabbath was the mark of Jehovah, the Creator God, as distinct from all the other false gods. When they kept the Sabbath, they were telling all the people, our God is the Creator. Our God is Jehovah. And so the Sabbath was some kind of a sign that separated from all other worshippers of other gods. And they said, we belong to this God. He is our God. We're His people. Is that what the Bible promised and God promised? We're His people. He is the Creator. We give our affections, our devotions to Him. We love Him, we serve Him because we love Him. If you love me, keep my commandments. We belong to Him. The Sabbath set Israel apart from all other peoples, from all other worshippers, from all other gods. And their love was set upon Jehovah the Creator. So He said, I brought you out of Egypt to be my people. Give your hearts to me. In Ruth chapter 4, as you remember, it talks about the Redeemer. And Boaz was the Redeemer. Remember the word relative means Redeemer as well as relative or kinsman. And so he came to redeem the property that Naomi had lost. He came to buy them back from slavery. He came to avenge them of their adversary, their enemy. And he came to marry the childless widow. Marriage has always involved the Redeemer. The Lord says in many, many places that He has redeemed us out of Egypt, children of Israel, and redeemed us out of the world. As you read the Bible in Exodus chapter 6, verse 6, and 2 Samuel 7:23, so I've redeemed you. I bought you out of there. You're mine. He came to be our closest relative so He could redeem us and have that right, that duty. So when He brought them out of Egypt, He had performed the rite of Redeemer. Part of that was to marry them. The Sabbath has much about it concerning redemption. The word redeem in its simplest meaning, according to Young's Analytical Concordance, means to set free. To set free. From bondage, from poverty and having lost your property, from the enemy, Satan, and from widowhood. No children. You'll die and your name will die in the promised land. No offspring. Sets us free. If you'll study the Sabbath in the Bible very carefully, you'll discover that every 7 years they had a sabbatical year. What happened the sabbatical year? All the slaves could go free. Right? Every 7th year, all the slaves could go free. The Bible teaches that. Another unusual thing happened. For all poor people, they could go out and have all the grain that grew in the fields voluntarily. The others would not plant any crops or harvest them. The poor could go out and have everything that was growing. Didn't charge them a thing for it. It was all theirs. God was always providing for the poverty-stricken, for those in bondage, for those who needed help, for those who needed to be set free. Every sabbatical year He did that. Every 7 years of 7, every 49 years, called the Jubilee, all property would go back to original owner automatically. So whatever farm or ranch or house you owned and you lost it by poverty, you'd automatically get it back after 49 years. So every lifetime you'd have another chance to start all over again. Wouldn't that be beautiful? God was caring for His people's needs as a marvelous provider. He said, I've redeemed you, you're mine. I'll do all this for you. So every 7 years He's setting them free, giving them a new rest from their masters and from hard work and so forth. And every 49 years they had 2 whole years of rest. They'd go down to the school of prophets and study. Didn't have to farm that year, didn't have to work. And the Lord would provide enough and the year before to take care of 2 or 3 years. Wouldn't that be something? That was God's plan for the Sabbath, sabbatical year, for the Jubilee year. And His plan to give rest every 7th day. The Lord has redeemed us from bondage, from poverty, from all these terrible things, from our adversary. He's come down to be joined to us in a tremendous relationship that we might have peace, we might have rest, we might have freedom. The last thing about the Sabbath and the husband I'd like to talk about, this golden clasp that unites us to God, His people to Himself. Did you ever stop to think about the bond between a Creator and His creation? We know about the bond between a mother and a child, or a father and a child. Suppose that you could invent the next child you're going to have, which some of the scientists are trying to do nowadays. Suppose you could choose the color of hair, how tall your boy would be, what color of eyes he'd have. Suppose you could choose what kind of mind he would have, how big his hands would be, how long his arms would be, how fast he could run. Suppose you could invent a human being. How long would it take you to invent us? How long did God take to invent man? I don't have any idea. Didn't matter, did it? If it took 1,000,000 years, what's wrong with that? If it took 2 seconds. But we were the crowning act of God's creation, we're told. Human beings. What do you think about the things you've made? When I was a boy, I took manual training in public school. First time I really learned to make some furniture with my hands. We lived in a very poor home, and I chose to make a magazine rack for my mother for our house. Our teacher taught us how to sand it down, after we cut it out, put it all together, how to fill in all the joints so everything was just smooth, and sand and sand and sand until it was just so smooth you couldn't feel one rough spot. And then how to finish it with several coats of varnish or lacquer, and sand between every coat using some rotten stone or pumice stone. Have you ever done that? And rub and rub and rub until finally you get a glossy finish that's just like glass. When you've worked and worked and worked and planned and planned and planned, and it's all yours, the whole thing, now you can present it as a gift. You almost break your buttons. It's mine. I did it. I remember the day I took it home to my mother. It was in the days of the Depression when we had the dust storms. And the dust had been swirling all day long, and so I went home from school that afternoon about 4 o'clock. It began to rain. And it rained mud. Just pelted mud down out of the sky from every direction. And I hovered over that magazine rack, trying to cover it up, but the mud was still hitting it. And by the time I got home, it was sandblasted with mud. And crying, I handed it to my mother and walked off. I didn't even dare look at her. They used it for years and years anyhow. I think out of just respect for me. Have you ever built a house that you invented? Have you? Have you ever made a dress, ladies, that was you just so proud of it, or something that was yours entirely? What did you think about it? What did you feel about it? What was it like to create a human being? The bond between the Creator and His creatures is 1,000 times more close than between a mother and a child. Do you know that? Because invention's involved. Like a great artist, planning and planning for years and years, working and working and working, and finally has the masterpiece. Will he sell it? No. Keeps it until he dies. His whole heart is in that. Isn't that right? Everything he knows is in there, like a masterpiece of music. He just keeps it and keeps it and keeps it. It's just the epitome of all his efforts, of all his mind. We are the crowning work of God's creation. We're the apple of His eye. He can't forget us. Came right out of His heart, right out of His mind. You are precious to me. How can I give you up? And He breathed into our nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul because of the living God. And now in redemption, He works day by day and hour by hour to bring us back to that glorious image which we lost by sin. And someday He's going to have human beings of whom He's very, very proud. And the sign between them, the golden clasp that binds them together, is going to be the Sabbath. Remembering the glorious One who invented us, who cares for us, a tremendous provider, who has redeemed us. We're His. We're bought with a price. Who every day broods over us and watches us and plans right now for what you need next year, cares for you as a treasure. Friends, do you worship Him? Do you find rest in Him? Do you find peace like a river, nothing to worry about? My God cares for me. Do you set your affections on Him? Is the Sabbath a high day? A tremendous recalling, a remembering who we are, who He is, how we got this way, what He does for us the whole week long, every day. And one little glimpse in nature will tell us all these things He made for us because we're so special. Then you'll call the Sabbath a what? A delight. The holy of the Lord, honorable, and you'll worship Him. I've been trying to tell you about the goodness of God. The spirit of the Adventist message of true Christianity, not the letter, but the spirit. I'm not trying to prove which is the right day. I'm trying to find the blessing in the Sabbath. I'm trying to lead us to the God of the Sabbath, the Lord of the Sabbath, and help us to see how the Sabbath was made for man. Friends, do you love Him? Do you love His marvelous law? And is the Sabbath a delight? A real delight? The holy of the Lord? Friends, God is waiting for hearts that respond. Sometimes we get quite dull, don't we? Almost in a stupor. Like we can't think. Sometimes it seems we're more stupid than dumb animals. The Lord is saying, can't you see? Don't you understand? Can't you see I'm on the job all the time, manifesting my love over and over again? You're so special to me. Oh, don't you love me? Don't you want to lay down at my feet like Ruth at the feet of Boaz and say, make me all yours. I love you with all my heart. Come and reign over me. Come and dominate me. Come and rule me. Before I sit down tonight, do you want to tell the Lord once again how precious He is to you, how wonderful is His law, and what a tremendous thing God has given to us in the Sabbath, the golden clasp? How many want to tell Him? Thank you so very much. May God help us to really keep the next Sabbath in love with our Creator, every moment walking hand in hand, following in His footsteps, never forgetting He's the tremendous God who loves us with an everlasting love.